Okay.
I'm sorry, Margot, what did you ask?
I had turned my computer around so you could see people, but it looks like I'm not online.
No, I'm seeing from the back gallery. I can see over Amy's shoulder.
Okay. Sorry.
So just a reminder to everyone, there is no voting this evening because it's committee of the whole, but if you can log into Crestron so we can keep track of the speakers list. We're ready to go? Okay, fantastic. So welcome to the Committee of the Whole for June 14. The meeting is called to order. In the boardroom, we have Amy, Jean, Margot, Kelly, Carol, Joanna, and Robbie. Online, we have Donna and Shin Yi, and absent is Naveed. Tonight, Amy will be honoring the land.
Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you, Amy. Jean, would you like to move a motion to approve the agenda?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Okay, is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, the agenda is approved by unanimous consent. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Okay, seeing none. We are moving on to the approval of the consent agenda. This evening, we have for approval item 2.1, minutes of Committee of the Whole, May 24, 2023. Margot, would you like to move a motion to approve the minutes?
I will.
Excellent. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, the minutes are approved by unanimous consent. That brings us up to our first item this evening, which is the LTAP public feedback. Last week, Fred presented to the board, and tonight you have the opportunity to ask any questions if you have any questions of Fred. So I will look to the speakers list. Jean.
Thank you very much. Through the vice chair to Fred, when I look at the presentation that you made last week, at the very beginning, it talked to the fact that there were a total of 225 responses gathered in the time frame of between May 18 and May 29. My first question is there consideration of whether that time frame is in the right part of the calendar for public to respond, or could it be lengthened? Because I think we all recognize that there were fewer responses this year. However, this does come on the back end of some other surveys that have been done in the board, and perhaps that we may have survey fatigue in our system. So just wondered if you could, that's my first question, if you could talk to us about that.
Through Vice Chair, through Trustee Gray, I agree with you. I agree that it might be part of that. So historically, when we did the last two releases of the LTAP, we did in the fall because of timing issues, delays, and whatever. And we had a significant response. But prior to that, when we were approving it in June, we had in and around the same amount of response as we do now, like in around like the 200, 300 mark. Whereas previous years, we were almost nearing the 1,000 mark. So yeah, we were a little bit underwhelmed. Like the amount of time that was given is comparable to what we did. It was about a week and a half. So what we want to do is we're thinking about relaunching it in the fall when we're getting prepped for the next round of LTAP updates, and kind of doing a little bit of an experiment, but also guiding the development of the next update to see if timing is a factor, and if it is, how can we adjust maybe our timing? And then secondly, too, it gives us another baseline to maybe gather more feedback of here's the approved document, what do you think? And kind of give us steps forward on how we're going to proceed with the document. It might also be helpful too, because we might be doing some other, outreach if, depending when the boundary review reports come in, they're deferred till September. So maybe that'll further engage our residents too. So I think we'll explore doing that in the new year and see if that's part of it. And the last thing I'd say too is, what's nice about getting it approved in June, albeit we might have some survey fatigue or whatnot, is that allows us to ramp up very quickly for boundary reviews come the fall. So I think the timing is still good to keep it in June and maintain that, but maybe we have to find something else to make sure we're engaging as per the intent of the documents.
Thank you. And I think the request from the public about boundary reviews, that information getting out sooner and more fulsomely was, I think, part of one of the recommendations. I want to go to slide 18 if we could. We all recognized when this was presented that this is an amazing document, and every year it gets better, and the graphics and the information and so on improves immensely, and I think we all are so grateful to you and your department. I want to ask you for slide 18, what are the takeaways from here, and what's going to inform your practice moving forward in terms of recognizing and responding to those, there's a couple nuggets in here from the public as to how we could do information differently, or how we could assist the public with their better understanding for the planning and within their communities. So, and that's integral to this whole report that you have, and I know it's everything that you're about. So I wonder what your takeaways are and how it's going to inform practice moving forward.
Absolutely, through Vice Chair to Trustee Gray. So that the responses to those directly, because there's a lot of those that are in there that are themes that were expressed. I don't necessarily agree with all of them. So there's a lot in there, and I think there's some I wouldn't say there's still room for improvement and learning that can be done from those things. So what we've done is kind of distill some of that information, and what's on slide 24 gives us a little bit of a listing of what those things could be. So as an example, like to me, student engagement was an important one just based on the numbers, but that's not really reflected from what's the information in slide 18. The interactive dashboard is where I think is going to help us in a lot of those factors in terms of navigability of the document, less jargon, understandability, finding the information. I think one of the limitations with a physical static document is that there's a lot of self-direction that's required, and you're having to kind of go through it, and not everyone has time to do that. So what we're looking is not making a lot more enhancements to this physical document, and now looking, okay, well, let's look at online, where we were dabbling a bit with it already with input your address. It pops up like what projects are in your area. If we can do more of that and take those metrics so that somebody can go in, put your address in, and then it's right there and it's easy to grasp and understand, I think that'll bring us a long way. So that kind of goes in with improved wayfinding, enhancement to the websites. The one big thing I want is I've got 38.7% of people that are unsure as to what's happening in their neighborhood. That's too high for me. I don't like that number. So what can I do to improve that? Is it that they're unsure if it impacts them or not, or is they're just unaware of what's happening? So I need to dive into that. Alignment with EDC, that has nothing to do with slide 18. So those are some of the things. And all the other thing is more engagement. That was the other one that I want to. So in-person meetings and workshops, we used to do them, we stopped. Maybe it's time to have a look again. People are maybe tired of online all the time. Maybe it's time to have a look and see if there's an opportunity to be more present and give an opportunity for people to come and see. So we might do that as well, just so that they're more involved along the process as opposed to one short window. So those are some of the goals. We can't do it all. But yeah, Were there any specifically that you wanted to bring up, or?
No, I didn't. I mean, I laughed when I saw the get rid of the jargon, because as you speak, and jargon is what education's about, it seems at times. But no, I think you've hit the key points, and that is making this so user friendly, and the fact that people can put their address in and come up with those areas around where they live that help sort of guide them to the part of the report that's most significant for their use. I think that's brilliant. Again, the experienced trustees in the room would say that this has gone so far down the road in improvements, and we thank you. And it's quite enjoyable to read. It's a fabulous document. I love the enhancements, and just keep on moving in that direction and making this so that our parent community can really engage with this and use this information. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Joanna.
Yes, thank you. Likewise, I'm very, very fond of this document. It's very almost fun to use. It's very user-friendly. There was a suggestion in the feedback about the fact that it is a really large document, and perhaps when you're asking for feedback, breaking it out into smaller portions. And there is some value to that, but if you would think about an aspect that you want to get feedback on, right? Put that out there, give enough heads up to the parent community and the community at large so they can kind of play with that particular aspect, and then, try another one. So just putting it out there for you to consider, because that might be a good way to get some really detailed feedback for you, or constructive, I guess, hopeful feedback, right? I did have a question, which now escapes me, so I'll go back. Thank you.
Robbie.
Thank you. You mentioned the boundary report proposals coming out in the fall. When is I have asked this question in other forums, but I'll ask it in a public one. When is feedback open on how those get set up?
So that falls under through you, Vice Chair Rocha, to Trustee Bryden. That's more the role and responsibility of the Boundary Review Steering Committee members that will look at what staff's initial proposal is and what was approved by the Board of Trustees in terms of what the scope of the review is going to be, and if we feel like additional schools are warranted to be added or removed, that's done at that point in time. Nothing prevents us, as we're in the process, if we're starting to see that perhaps we should involve an additional school, like that was our missing piece. I don't think it's been out of sorts that we've added schools along the way as well if we see there's value to that. So that's an opportunity. And a lot of time that might not be directly feedback from the community, but that might be something that's worked through with our boundary review committee members or parent representatives that say, you know what, maybe we got to look at this because we're hearing this from the community. Maybe we look at it and bring it in. So I'd say that's probably the only opportunity. Otherwise, it's very much led by the steering committee that selects which schools are going to be part of the process and confirms that before giving final notice to the community.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no further, okay, Kelly, go ahead.
Sorry. Through you. So Fred, I've gone through a lot of the questions, and one of the things that strikes me is I guess it's about people not understanding what's actually happening in their own neighborhoods. And maybe that there's an opportunity to educate, maybe from the elementary to the secondary, about what is going on in their communities. And I'm not sure how that would be done, but a lot of people are, I notice, making comments and they're not understanding that where their child is supposed to go, and especially in North Oakville with all the uncertainty. But there's a lot of things that are already probably they could be told, but they haven't. And I'm not sure how to address it, but it's very interesting that it comes out through this, that they're sharing their concerns, but they're not something per se that actually are part of what you would address through the LTAP, but there's things that need to be addressed somehow. And it's great information. I just think that it's something we need to maybe be educating communities about the flow and where their child will go depending on the program they're at and that kind of thing. And I don't know if even adding flow charts or something, but I just love what you've done with the LTAP in the last couple of years, because I'll tell you, I was cleaning up files the other day and some of the old LTAPs, they went anyways. So thank you for all of you and your department have done, because it's great. But food for thought about the other piece. I don't know how to address that.
Through you, Vice Chair Rocha, to Trustee Emma, if you can fly me a couple of them just as examples, and I'll mull it over and see if there's ways that we can engage, or at least give some opportunities for people to get those questions answered. So, thank you.
Joanna?
Yes, thank you, because Kelly actually reminded me what my question was. So you did mention about 80% of respondents weren't familiar with what's going on in the neighborhood. And I wonder if from the survey you're able to establish what types of neighborhoods they're in. Like, are they already established, or are they under construction? Because that might help to explain the kind of information you want to put out, right, and how you do it. And more specifically, the neighborhood in my Ward 4 area, Glen Abbey Encore, as you recall, we often get questions about the site that's been reserved for a school. So that would be an example where if people click on what's happening in my area, and maybe you've done that, I'm sorry, I haven't explored, there could be a message, right, that pops up that explains what's happening with that site.
So, Vice Chair, to Trustee Oliver, no, we didn't do it, but we can do it because we've collected the postal code data, or at least the first 3 digits, as well as the ERA that they're impacted. We haven't mapped it, but I think that's an interesting one to see. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Or I won't do it. Marie's going to do it, our mapping analyst, which has done a fantastic job. But I think that's a good indicator, and I'm glad you brought that up. And to your second question, yes, it's in there. It's a part of a feasibility study that we set a date as to when we'll determine whether or not the site is needed. And it gives a little bit of a description of what the issue is and the proposed actions.
Margot.
Hi, thank you, through you. So this is a question really about the public feedback. So I'm just wondering, how do we circle back to the public when they've asked questions? So what is our protocol for when there is a comment, and I'll say an individual comment because there's some comments that might be coming up that aren't heard from other people. What is our response to addressing the concerns that come up from the public?
So through Vice Chair Rocha to Chair Shuttleworth, we don't give individual responses to each one of them. We haven't done that. What we do is, if we've noticed that there's gaps in the LTAP or explanations, like we've done a number of changes already. Marie's working on them right now as we speak with Lorene and Michelle. Those get integrated. So if there's ways that we can clarify the message, then that'll be in there. So those are addressed. Some of them, Trustee Imbus had pointed out, like some of them, there aren't really a response to them because they're more specific, or there's just a statement. So those ones we don't necessarily have something, but I'd be open to suggestions, just managing kind of the expectations of the community that we won't be able to give responses to all of them. But if there are key gaps, we definitely want to address those. So,
because I'm just wondering, so, I look at the chart, and there's quite a few questions and answers, which I've read through. And so if we don't respond, how does the public know, or how can we instill confidence that we are actually listening to the voices that we're hearing? So if we're not answering them, how do they know that when we ask for this input, we ask for this feedback? So that's great, you feedback, and then it goes into this chart, and then nothing comes of it. So how do we ensure that this feedback is seen and used in a meaningful way?
I'd like to take that one back. I think I don't think we have the capacity to give individual, very personalized responses, but I think there's certainly a way where we can say, this has been incorporated within the LTAP. so that there is somewhat of a response. So I'll take that one back to the team and brainstorm on maybe some ways we can either bring together themes or like responses, somewhat like we do with the boundary review processes, and see if there's a way forward on that. Just to your point, show that we are listening, and then make it a little bit more apparent that we are, because we're not redlining the LTAP, but we're just making the changes. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you.
Carol.
Through you, Chair Shuttleworth, to Fred, I guess how we, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Rocha. I have a question that I received from a few parents at Abbey Lane School who reviewed the LTAP, and I think some of them may have commented in the feedback just based on the comments that I was reading. For that school in particular, in ERA 115, there's some mention of long-term reviews, accommodation, like looking at accommodation in 2028 and beyond. And so the discussion about a proposal currently to move a Gary Allen program into Abbey Lane caught some of them by surprise, because although they understood that their school is underutilized and that there is excess space, they were thinking that this conversation would be happening in the long term as opposed to now. And I just wondered if you could comment on sort of how those decisions are made as to when to start the conversation about excess space, and around whether or not a PAR would be initiated, and what the criteria is for a PAR versus a boundary review.
So through Vice Chair Harrison to Trustee Baxter, that's, what did I say? Oh my, muscle memory. How many times have I done it? Okay. All right, thank you. Through Vice Chair Rocha to Trustee Baxter. Wow. I remember the question. Let me just reformulate my thoughts. So with regards to those, so a lot of those, I'll admit, we did push those out quite far. The main reason is because pupil accommodation reviews right now, or at least school closures and consolidations, are technically under a moratorium until such a time boards update their policies to close schools, which we can't do without updated guidelines from the ministry. So because of that, we've pushed them out. That's not to say that we can't look at feasibility studies throughout the term. And I think this one came up probably a little bit out of our, we were, I wouldn't say surprised, but the need came, and like, okay, well, let's have a look at what the opportunities are and look at alternatives for those spaces. So part of what we define in the feasibility studies is, can we use the space for either, other educational uses? Can we use it for administrative uses? Is it a community planning and partnership, which we've circulated? We haven't received anything. So in this case, we had a problem with space at our current location for that Gary Allen Center, and an opportunity arose. So we looked at the feasibility, and we've moved ahead with it to explore how that would look like in Abbey Lane, and that's how that came to be. A lot of it, they're tentative timelines that we place in there as to when we're trying to focus what our capacity for work is with a lot of projects that we have to do. But if something were to come up, it wouldn't be the first time we'd pull them forward and say, you know what, now's a good time, and we'll adjust it. So yeah, that's a little bit how it goes. So I think that once we get a better sense on those and we adjust our projects, you'll probably see that throughout your areas. If you do see underutilized spaces, of maybe we're going to start those feasibility studies a little bit earlier. But again, it's just based on capacity. So right now we're trying to set expectations. If an opportunity arises, though, we may jump on it and just move things around. So that's a little bit what happened with Abbey Lane. And those are to avoid, because before we do closures, and I'll just put the plug in again, is we have to talk about closures and reducing space. But before we get to that, we want to make sure that we've looked at all the other options before there to see if we can utilize the space. And if the answer to all those is no, then that's when we have to face the reality of maybe closure consolidations, maybe a need or demolition of space.
All right. There are no further speakers, so thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions this evening, Fred. We are up to 3.2 administrative procedures. First up, we have Dean, who will be speaking to the age of consent administrative procedure.
Good evening, everyone. I've brought along our two professional managers from Student Wellbeing, Marcia Simslook and Marla Cameron. So there's joining me here this evening. If there's any questions. What we'd like to just share with you is the Age of Consent AP addresses the consent processes for all professional services staff who are in the Student Wellbeing Department and the Special Education Services Department. The AP outlines the referral procedures, and the various special professional services are social work, psychological services, speech and language pathology, behavioral analyst, occupational therapy, and child and youth counselors. So throughout this process, with some minor tweaks, we just sought some legal advice to clarify the capacity of when a young person has consent, which is at 12 years old. We're increasingly finding that the great support that we provide to our schools, it's a little bit more necessary now at the middle school level. So we've been actually providing more services for social work at the grade 7, 8 level. So those are some pieces that I just want to bring out in this, and we're happy to take any questions.
And we do have a speakers list. So Jean, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It's actually a comment. I couldn't help but notice in your cross-referencing of these different documents just how old some of these documents are, going all the way back to 1996. And I'm flabbergasted that there hasn't been updates by our, I guess, provincial government on some of these documents. And would you have any idea if there's a movement towards updating these? Because surely, to goodness, there's been changes from a legal expectation over all these years.
Through your Vice Chair to Trustee Gray. It's interesting, like we did have legal advice from Julian Tuck-Katarnia, and there was no reference. I think some of these things just are sort of legal pieces that are the foundation for the AP. So they're kind of reference points. But I'll turn it over to my colleagues if there are any other points you'd like to add on that from your experience.
I think the only thing I could comment, Vice Chair Rocha to Trustee Gray. Only thing I'd comment is how long it has taken to get the behavior analyst into one of the college, and we've been waiting a couple of years for that to pass. So I do know that these things take a long time. I also think the foundation of the Healthcare Consent Act is not heavily disputed. There's lots of common understanding of that. But yes, they are old, but they are the current legislative practices that we work under.
Please. Given that they're so old, is there anything that would be, in your opinion, sort of restricting or confining in that they are not really updated documents to guide us? Is there anything concern that way? I'm looking at whether we should be, questioning our provincial government why we haven't more recent documents.
In response to that, nothing that comes to mind, Trustee Gray. I think there probably needs to be some consultation with our treaty partners, especially around the consent of parent, guardian, and substitute decision maker for different family structures and who is able to give consent. But I can't comment further on that. It's more in the legal domain.
Amy.
Thank you. I see a tremendous amount of work on this, and I just wanted to thank you for recognizing all of the different professionals that we employ and are in the service of children in our schools. This seems to be very comprehensive, and so I appreciate it very much. Just curious about one thing. The topic says age consent. Shouldn't it be age of consent, or is that a legal term?
What page are you on?
The very first page at the top, age consent.
I think, I think we've missed that.
Okay.
It should say age of consent.
Thank you.
So thank you. We will change that.
Thanks.
Margot.
Hi, thank you. Through you, Tanya. This is just coming up because I'm doing some work right now, and we talked about passive consent. So I'm just wondering, with the idea of consent, when we're asking parents for consent, are we asking for written consent, or if we give them an information and don't hear from them, do we assume passive consent? I'm just wondering that question.
Yeah, I can take that. Thank you very much for that question. In the work that we do as social workers and child and youth counselors, it is very important that we get active consent. So we go through really detailed, informed consent detailing risks and benefits, what our service looks like, outlining that at any time service can be withdrawn, and detailed what our limits of confidentiality looks like.
Thank you.
All right, Robbie?
Thank you, Vice Chair, and through you. I'm just to understand what this is. At the outset, it says the Healthcare Consent Act does not prescribe a particular age, and then through our procedure, we lay out particular ages for particular services. Are we? Can you tell me, is this common standard across fields? Are we interpreting the Act in so doing? It says elsewhere in the document that this is governed through the Act. So are we adding an interpretation to the document, or is this an existing interpretation of the Healthcare Consent Act?
To Vice Chair Rocha, to Trustee Fred, I can answer that. So it is, the Healthcare Consent Act does not prescribe an age. There is a common understanding amongst disciplines in healthcare that 12 is understood to be an age where neurotypical, they can make a decision and understand risks and benefit to this type of decision. So it's not our interpretation, it is common understanding amongst many disciplines.
And to follow up, the passage, for students who are age 12 or 13, written or verbal consent of a parent guardian to obtain SLP services should be obtained. Where is the student is consenting to service, but the parent is all? I'm curious. Who is consenting here?
Do you want me to take that one as well?
The student, the student is consenting, and we are asking, it should be the student, but with the SLPs, they would like parents' consent if possible, but the student is the main person that needs to consent.
Okay, thank you.
Joanna.
Thank you. This is kind of a difficult question, but how do you reconcile when a student is consenting or reaching out for service and there is a disagreement or disconnect with the parents? How do you reconcile that? How do you protect the rights of the student in those cases?
Vice Chair Rocha, to Trustee Oliver, I'm learning. Thank you very much for that question. That is a very good question, and it is something that we are going to be looking at. What I will say is that we have started this process just to get a taste of what it's like with 12-year-olds and letting schools advise families that the process of having a social worker in their school to work with 12-year-olds with the advice of our legal department has started, and that has happened where a parent has said no more to social work support. So, and we have had students that have said, yes, I want the support. So it has been a bit of a struggle. So in one situation where what I'm thinking about is the social worker was seeing a student, the parent decided to stop the service. So we had to listen to those wishes at that point. But what the social worker did do was provide the student with information about ROC services, so they knew that there were other services available if they needed further mental health support. Yeah. It is a difficult predicament.
All right. There are no other questions. So thank you to the three of you for presenting this revised AP. For all the trustees, the AP will appear under the consent agenda items at next week's board meeting. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Next up, we have Fred. He is going to be speaking to the boundary review AP.
All right. Right. So I was prepped for the through Vice Chair Rocha to the rest of the trustees. So for the boundary review AP, we're a little bit overdue, so we've made a number of changes. I'd say in terms of scope, it doesn't necessarily change the process. There's a few key things that have changed. There's been some additions, so I'll go over them briefly. So really, at the end of the day, the spirit of the AP remains the same. In terms of what we wanted to do and why we've made so many changes, one of the things we wanted to do is improve the flow of the AP procedure. What we found is that it was, the way it read, it was kind of like you read definitions and then you got into process, and then you had processes, the pathway 1 and 2, that were kind of overlapping, and you had schedules that were a little bit more difficult to follow. So what we did there is we've essentially disaggregated everything. So we have a section of definitions that explains all of the typical things that are going on in the boundary review process, qualifying them. Then we go into the pathway processes. Now we have 3, and I'll get into what number 3 is. So that way they've got distinct sections as well as their distinct schedules. So they've got their own. They're not combined together and say if, when, this. It's just this is the process to follow. We've added pathway number 3, which is, it's not really a boundary review. It's more of a student redirection AP that gives some parameters around when we're doing redirections. And again, it's the same process as we've done, but we've just formalized a little bit more in an AP. So if the community is wondering why this is happening, we have an explanation to it. It's also a recommendation that was provided to us by the Ombudsman saying that, you might want to have something like this, and here's some comparables throughout the region. So that one, again, the process that we follow typically is unchanged. It's now just written down. The other thing we did in terms of the process itself, that's an actual change. And I'll note, Trustee Amos had pointed this out. There's an error in the policy as it's written right now, so we'll have to fix that. We've made it so that the co-chairs for the boundary review committee, as well as the steering committee, the committee itself is comprised of the affected SO as the co-chair, and then the GM will be the co-chair for GM of Plan will be the co-chair for that committee instead of the trustee, which has been historically that. The last few reviews, the presenters have been the SO and the general manager of planning. However, trustees are still completely involved in the process and have equal standing as a member. So that's one change we've made. Happy to discuss that. And for the BRSC, that one is the non-affected SO that'll chair that and co-chair it with the committee. There's still affected and non-affected trustees as part of both committees. That remains the same. That's unchanged. It's just the position of co-chair. And then the other thing that we've incorporated too is the reality that we're now able to do hybrid meetings, which has been, I think, well received, especially with our parent communities. So you're not having to rush out the door to get to a meeting. So we've operationalized a little bit more. And most importantly in that is the observers, which we've seen as kind of something that really happened in actually 2 of our latest boundary reviews. And just acknowledging again, an observer is an observer. They may participate by watching, but they can't participate in providing their questions during that. So we're just clarifying in here, and I want to be clear that when we're meeting in person or if we're meeting online, we might just have it so that they're not in person. They can do it through a live stream. They're not supposed to be participating directly anyways. And then the other is when we're online, they can't be part of the breakout sessions with the parent committee members and other chair. So that way, what we're trying to do is encourage open discussion and idea development without the fear of somebody saying, well, you said this and now my student is moving or something like this. So we're just trying to make it so we have open discourse. So that's one of the changes we've incorporated as part of this as well. I think those are the broad strokes. I'm happy to take any questions. One last thing. I don't want to bring this forward for June 21st approval. I want to defer it for September, subject to the feedback we received tonight or over the next couple of weeks. My intent is to take that, make some minor tweaks and adjustments. I do want to have legal review to review it and just make sure that there's no contradictions and that it flows nicely. And then once that's done, then hopefully moving forward, we can just make minor tweaks and no more big red lines like this.
Okay, so just to confirm, this isn't coming back next week, but it'll come back sometime in the fall.
I'm hoping September, the first board meeting back in September, we'll get you a fresh document.
Okay.
And we'll gauge it based on how much feedback and changes are requested by the trustees.
All right. Okay, so we do have a speakers list. First up, Amy.
Thank you. Through you to Fred, I am a bit concerned about the change in the co-chairs. Having a trustee as a co-chair with a superintendent from a non-affected area was a good way of balancing staff perspective with public perspective. And I learned a lot about boundary reviews by co-chairing them because you get a greater understanding of what's involved in the boundary review by being actively involved. And if you're not co-chairing, you're more likely going to be observing rather than getting involved in the presentation, right? You also have 3 people listed as co-chairs in the current AP. You have one family of schools superintendent from a non-affected area, another superintendent from a non-affected area, and the general manager of planning services. I'm assuming that one of those is a typo. So why not have 3 co-chairs and keep the trustee in that loop so that you have an education superintendent, you have the planning expert, and you have the representative of the public co-chairing together. I think that there's something to be said for having all of those perspectives working together as co-chairs.
Through Vice Chair Rocha to Trustee Collard. Did I say it again? What's happening? Tanya. I'm going to say Tanya. Slightly, jeez. Again, I remember the question. So what I would like to say is I'm not meaning to diminish the role of the trustee. Maybe it's just stylistically how, the last few meetings have been run. To me, like all members are really what it is who's presenting the slide deck at the end of the day and who's up front providing the presentation to the public committee. I think everyone has a voice. Like I don't want to change what you saw in the last 2 boundary reviews or 3. We've done 3 in COVID. It's essentially operationalizing what we've been doing. So the reason I said co-chair for the SO and for general manager of planning is mostly we're doing the upfront presentations. But when we're in a meeting, honestly, it's the way that it should be run. Maybe that's how we have to frame it within the AP is, all the members have an opportunity to speak and, contribute to the conversation. That's the point of it, is that everybody brings their perspective and with the goal of community, school board perspective, and just kind of a common goal for everyone's benefit. So that's supposed to remain unchanged within the spirit of the AP. So I'll take that back and see if there's a way where I can clarify it. But really, it's more who's doing the presenting is the chairing piece of it.
Okay. I have to admit I haven't done a boundary review since you came to be with us, so I don't know what your style of conducting a boundary review is like, but if you're inviting all voices to speak at the public meetings, then I think that's fine. Yeah, that's not how they were done before. So, thank you.
Maybe just to maybe bring in like some others that or some staff that I think Tina, typically I wasn't here for the past, like I've just been through the COVID, but usually, yeah. Yeah, we'll confirm that, but yeah, that's kind of the same flow as when we're in the meeting, you know, you can have a conversation, ask questions. We had Jean, that was part of it, and Don, I think, is online too. Like you've been part of those previous reviews, so I'm hoping we had kind of the same style going, but you know, I'm happy to take any feedback on that and see how we can make that clear within the AP.
I can confirm that is how it was run in the last boundary review.
Prior to, I guess, the COVID ones we did, Donna?
No, Fred, as you've just described it with the collaborative approach is how the Burlington boundary review was run.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Joanna.
Thank you. And my question kind of segues nicely into this because I'm thinking I don't see anything in here about the role of trustees. And I've only was active on one boundary review. And there are some new people or some who never had a chance to do it. And I'm just wondering, is there a place to kind of define what the role of trustee is so that the public understands and also so that we all behave and carry out our duties in a standard, same fashion?
Through you, Tanya, to Joanne. It is defined in two ways. One, the role as the board of trustees is you're the ultimate approver of the boundary review process. So we'll provide the director of education and the admin council will provide the final recommendation around the table. And as a collective, you make a decision on which one gets approved. While you're a committee member, you are a boundaries review steering committee or a boundary review committee member. So that is your mandate. That's how it's defined in there. So if anyone's asking what's the role of the trustee as a member, one and the same as everyone else around that table. So that's your role as part of it. So you have the hat of a trustee. That's your expertise. Like we have education superintendents, et cetera, all that. But your mandate is the one and the same as everyone else around the horseshoe.
Kelly.
Thank you. Through you. Probably because I've been here the longest and been through the most iterations of boundary reviews and others. I've been through many different styles. I've been the co-chair on multiple where I was a co-chair presenting with the superintendent. I was a trustee for an affected area where you are virtually silent and can't say anything. Only the non-area trustee is allowed to speak at that point because they don't want you to influence the conversation as a area trustee. And so those are the two main, but I've had blended as well. I think this looks great, and I love that you streamlined it. It made it clearer because it was very complex. And I think just a few tweaks and just the clarification of the rules.
There are no further questions. Okay, so this will not be appearing on next week's consent agenda. It'll sometime later in the year. Up next, we have the transportation policy, which you will also be speaking to, correct, Fred?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
All right, this one a little bit more simple. This one we're aligning with some of the wording within the HCDSB policy. So that's number one, especially on the principles. We've added guiding principles too that flesh out a little bit what was in the initial paragraph in terms of, you know, how we define transportation, exception areas, the ability to contest the way that we've calculated distance or exception areas. and just making it clear that we're trying to be as safe and as cost effective as possible. So we're balancing those two things. So really, it's just kind of stating what we're trying to achieve in developing transportation or providing transportation services to students. And other than that, I think we've just replaced board with HDSB a few spots, and nothing substantive as to how we conduct business, just clarifying, what the principles of the policy are. Happy to take any questions. And this one is coming next week.
Yeah. Okay. So we do have a speakers list. First up is Jean, and after Jean will be Donna.
Thank you very much, through the Vice Chair. I happen to be, because of some things going on with transportation up in Acton, I happen to be looking at some of the procedures, and I'm wondering if at the very end, under related admin procedures, if everything that we have is listed there, because I've been working with, I believe, an operating procedure that's, and I didn't bring it with me tonight, that's entitled exemption or review of exemptions, I think, something like that. And this has been exceedingly an important document in our current deliberations in Acton, and I think it should be listed here. I'm just wondering if there's any others that you might know of.
Through Tanya to Jean, top of my head, no, but that should be one of them for sure, because it does impact eligibility in defining those exemption areas, or at least how we define those. So let me take that back with the GM of transportation and see if there's any others we should add in.
And just as a follow-up, I wondered if in the body of this, there shouldn't be mentioned that this review of exemption occurs on an annual basis. I'm not sure that I read that anywhere in this, or if this is the appropriate place for that to be, but certainly it's all encompassing when it comes to the annual review report that we received last week.
Through you, Tanya, to Jean, it's in A, but not the annual review. So that it's implied there, which warrants provision of transportation of certain eligible students as a result of safety concerns as determined. So that's where the exception area one's coming. So what you're asking is if we could make reference to that policy and say that that's reviewed annually.
I think that's an important part of this. After we looked at what was a 7 to however many page report last week, it was quite comprehensive and it involved all of Halton Region. So I think it would be very important to have that at least mentioned. Thank you.
Cool.
All right. Next up, we have, I made a mistake. It's not Donna who's on the line. It's Shinyi who has his hand up. So go ahead, Shinyi.
Thank you, through Vice Chair. This is not question, so I read the policy, the procedure, and I have some comments. Maybe the senior team can take consideration about that. So the first one is, I believe the policy should cover the gifted program, iSTEM program, and IB program. Because from the public, I got a lot of questions, and which program has the school bus? Because for lots of families, they will take the transportation plan. It's very important as a fact for their decision to enroll such special programs. And the second one, I want to make a comments about in Burlington, there are several city bus routes to schools in morning, afternoon. So if the city bus is a cover those several school areas, we need to take into account for those schools areas. And we still apply the same rules like the distance rule for school bus. So this we need to consider, because otherwise we have both city bus and school bus to the same schools. And the families will be confused which bus, what is the preferred way they can take, send their children to school. And the third one, a couple of months ago, we had an Inspire Award recipient who is a school bus driver and who supports the children who came to Canada recently. There's a newcomer with limited English skills. And I also get some questions about that. And this is not for bus driver. This is just for our, there's a welcome session. Because I know there's every year in summer, we have a welcome session for the new bus riders. If we add this welcome session to the policy, so everybody or all the families, they are new to the Halton region and they know there's a standardized process, and we have a welcome session for the new bus riders on a certain day or in a range of the day, and they can check if they can still register for the welcome session. I believe that will make the children's the first day to schools easier and happier. Thank you.
I'll start with number one is the programs being listed as this policy. I think we avoided that. I think I'm gonna have to check. I think there's a other policy that speaks to which programs are eligible for transportation, because they're not all eligible for transportation. So I got to make sure there's no duplication. We tend to not want to do this because if we do list programs that are maybe provided, especially optional programs, we're going to have to come back constantly to do it. I think if parents are wondering if they're eligible for transportation based on the program, Halton Bus does have an online app where you provide your address, your program, and it'll tell you whether or not you're eligible. So perhaps we can provide some more, we can direct parents to that portal. The second point was with regards to, and I just want to make sure I understood that correctly, is whether we should make concessions for the distance calculation for students that may not have access to municipal transit. Was that the question?
Right, because there are several, yes, there are several bus routes to the school, I know, in Burlington, and this is specifically for students, I believe. So if the bus is going to the school, so the parents will be confused if they can take the bus, or they should still consider, based on the distance, they still use the school bus. So the city bus or school bus, which one is a preferred method for transportation?
So for that,
yeah. I mean, if there's already the area schools already covered by the school bus, by the city bus, maybe we have the different distance, different rules for the school buses.
Oh, I see. So try to reduce providing. Okay, that one's a little bit difficult for the time being, and I like that approach. I just think right now our municipal transit system within the region of Halton isn't as robust to make that a consistent piece. We're already starting to see, however, some municipalities starting to dabble into providing free transit for our youth to see if they could bolster ridership, and maybe that leads to more services being available to make it more consistent, so that we may be able to rely on that in the future. But for now, I think we can't make full reliance because we don't have full access throughout the region. Even Halton Hills still doesn't have a municipal transit system too. So we got to be careful, especially on an equity standpoint.
So so Shinyi, to that point, I know about 3 years ago, the Burlington trustees did meet with the Burlington mayor to look at how we could do that shared ridership with the city. I did see the mayor at the Central anniversary over the weekend and said that was something that we would be interested in sort of reconvening. I do know, as Fred sort of spoke a little bit of, I know Oakville has free ridership for kids 12 to 18. So I don't know that right now we can look at that difference between, because school buses are separate from municipal transport, but if we can have those conversations, I'd be happy to include you in the discussions in Burlington.
Sure, thank you.
All right, Amy, you're next.
Thanks. And to tag on to that, when we met
Sorry, Fred has to answer one more question, right?
And I apologize, I missed, was it?
Oh, the third question, this the third comment is about the welcome session for the school bus every year in summer. So if we put that as a standard process, so all the families new to Halton region, so they can check our policy, so they know there's a welcome session, something like that, and they can make it. I think this is for all the new families to Halton easier, and for their children it's easier and happier.
And I think HSTS does provide for that. They provide communications to have that first-time ridership for especially JK students. So what I'll do, I'll talk to the GM of HSTS just to confirm with what that communication protocol is, and I can forward that over to you, G.
All right, Amy, you're next.
Thank you. So tagging on to what Margot said about the meeting with the mayor, it was all of the Burlington trustees. So Robbie, you would be invited as well. And it was a very good meeting. We thought we were heading down a path and then COVID hit. Yeah. So my question is around under requirements number 3. You say urban areas and then you say rural areas, and it says more than 1.6 kilometer brackets 1 mile or less based on safety considerations. But based on safety considerations isn't just for the rural areas. So I was wondering if that ought not to be its own sentence, because it would apply to both urban and rural. We make exemptions based on safety within the rural and urban settings. So, and we could probably take out 1 mile. This country has been metric since 1976. Sorry, I just had to. Just had to.
Oh, yeah, I'm very much okay with that, and let's support the metric system. Yes, and then let me get back to the rationale. So that's probably some historic wording there. A lot of the issues with rural is that it's if there's no sidewalks or anything, it's just, especially on the rural road. But I'll see why that's not just an exemption, or if it's just maybe it happens more often than not. So as opposed to having numerous exemptions, they're just saying rule of thumb is that 9 times out of 10 we're going to be giving you a 1.6 kilometer. I'll find out why that is, and then.
My objection to it, it's not really an objection. My concern is that by specifically stating that only for the rural areas, we have urban areas where there are no sidewalks as well. You know, and so it's not just the rural kids who might be getting busing at less than 1.6 kilometers. Yeah, the exemptions happen for the kids living in the orchard going to Hayden because of the construction happening on Dundas, for example. You know, so there are all kinds of safety exemptions made, and to have that statement only at the rural spot in that chart makes it look like we don't do safety exemptions for other areas, which is why I'm thinking it could be its own statement, not on the chart, but below the chart, that exemptions are made based on safety. It's not an individual thing. It's for, you know, entire clusters of students that live in an area where there might be a cause for safety exemption.
I think that's duly noted, Trustee Collard.
All right. Seeing no further questions, seeing as how this is a policy, it will appear at next week's board meeting for its first appearance. Okay, so its first appearance will be June 21st, and then it would be scheduled for a vote in September. All right, thank you. Okay, so next up on the agenda is the draft professionalism policy. Sari is here in case we have any questions for him, because he did already present the policy back in, I think, April. Yeah, let's say April. He presented the policy in April, and at which point I had made a motion to refer it to committee so that we would have an opportunity to discuss the motion. So I'll start off the discussion with perhaps asking Sari, is there anything new that you would like to add or say to the policy?
No, not at this point.
Okay, Thank you.
Thank you.
I did receive a few questions from the public that I'll start off with, and then we can go ahead with a speaker's list for SARI, and we'll go from there. Let me just try to find them. Okay, so I'm going to read verbatim questions I received from the public, and if you could answer them, that would be great. So the first question is, why is the, and this is in reference to the policy, why is the HDSB dress code policy not referenced in the draft policy, in addition to the code of conduct and respectful workplace procedure?
Through you, Vice Chair Rocha, Tanya, to trustees, I will assume that the person submitting the question is referring to the student dress code policy. I'll make that assumption. That is true that the draft policy, as presented to you, to trustees, only references the code of conduct and the respectful workplace policy. Does not reference the student dress code policy. And this is because this policy, as it stands, is applicable to staff and employees only, not students. Generally speaking, if you scan our policies that are applicable to students and or staff, there's a clear delineation between the two for a host of reasons, legal reasons, as well to underscore that the relationship that exists between the board, the employer, and its employees is distinctly different than the relationship that exists between this organization and its students. As recently as last week, we presented the health and safety policy, for example, and we, through the feedback of trustees and legal counsel, it was important that we delineate the two. So that's really the key or the reason as to why we don't reference any policies or procedures that really are applicable to students. Okay.
Thank you. The second question is in the draft policy, I believe it's on page 2, in OREG, in whatever OREG that is, let me pull it up. Yeah, OREG 43797. It refers to the words disgraceful, dishonorable, or unprofessional. So the person who's asking the question has asked for the definition of, please define disgraceful, dishonorable, or unprofessional.
Through you, Vice Chair Rocha, to trustees and the individual asking the question. Obviously the Ontario College of Teachers Act is where Regulation 437/97 is derived from. In a way, the Act is really the overarching framework or the policy statement. Let's call it that. And the regulation is a companion operational document, akin or similar to an administrative procedure. So the reason these definitions don't exist in the policy, first of all, the policy applies to not only teachers in the district, it applies to a host of professions. And professionalism, obviously professionalism is a very difficult thing to define. It often refers to, knowledge, experience, attitudes, that we expect a member of a profession to follow, judgment. So you want to steer away from a precise prescriptive definition as much as possible because you need some discretion. That said, as you pointed out, the regulation does define what acts that amount to professional misconduct. In fact, I believe there are 28 examples in the regulation. So if we are to define professionalism in that prescriptive sense, that would belong in an administrative procedure. You will also notice, and I would say this is just my opinion, the regulation deliberately or purposely does not, construct a list of do's and don'ts that amount to dishonorable or disgraceful. It leaves it up to those who are in charge of upholding these standards to exercise judgment, considering the circumstances or the case or a case to decide what is dishonorable, what is shameful, what is deplorable. So these definitions, again, generally speaking, don't exist in policies. They would exist in companion procedures. Nonetheless, defining them can be also a challenge, given that, the concept is very broad and abstract.
All right, thank you. And the last question from the public was, what is new in this consolidation and affirming of existing expectations regarding staff professionalism, including dress and decorum, that would change any decision-making processes of the HDSB?
Thank you for that question, Trustee Rocha. To you and trustees, obviously throughout this exercise in developing this policy, and this policy development cycle, we had stated that to introduce any new concepts or guidelines in the form of a policy would be challenging, would be in violation of the Labor Relations Act, for example, given that we have collective agreements that have expired and have not been renewed. So as far as newness, the draft policy is, again, a consolidation of existing expectations and standards that we and regulatory bodies expect our staff to uphold and to honor. I can say that, I can proudly say that we have robust, rigorous processes and procedures, existing processes and procedures that allow us to respond to any situation that we feel we need to respond to. So as far as newness, again, the short answer is there's nothing new specifically in these policies for the reasons I pointed out. Dress code and decorum, again, that we've spoken about this in the past, that they're operational in nature, and if we were to contemplate these kinds of guidelines, they would not exist in the policy.
All right, thank you. So what I'd like to do is we do have two speakers, so I'll go to the speakers list first, and then because this is a discussion for committee, I just want to outline what our options are in what our next steps are with this policy. So up first is Amy.
Thank you. I think there is a lot of confusion about the dress code policy because it isn't called student dress code policy. It is called school dress code policy. And so many people would believe that staff are covered under that because they work in schools. The majority of our staff do. I'm wondering if it would be a good idea for us to change the name of that policy to student dress code policy. And I was just adding that because of the question. I have another question too. Thank you. And in our prior conversations, you and I have had a few conversations about the professionalism policy because of my role as the chair of the Governance Document Review Standing Committee. And the recommendation that we had come out of that was that there needed to be a merging of policies so that we would have one very robust policy that spoke to professionalism and respect in the workplace. And you had even suggested that that could be the name of the policy if they were merged. But now I see you coming forward with the same policy that we saw in April. So I'm wondering what happened to that idea, and what are the caveats to doing that?
Through you, Vice Chair Rocha, to Trustee Collard, you're absolutely correct. We've had this discussion conceptually. Obviously, we've talked about that we have existing policies and procedures that speak to perhaps not explicitly to professionalism in the workplace. We've discussed the fact that there's a clear nexus between civility and respect in the workplace and professionalism. To be a professional is to have a civil and respectful attitude that honors your profession, and it also means that you're proficient as it relates to knowledge and skills and abilities in your craft. So clearly there's an overlap between the concept of respect and civility. We haven't brought this forward, as a concept, given the fact that this is a motion on the floor that speaks to professionalism. So we have to to the professionalism policy, we have to address that motion as a standalone item procedurally, I believe, and Manager Carrillo can speak to that. Having said that, the respect for workplace policy, for example, and its companion procedure is up for review this fall. And so if we so choose to embed some of the concepts and the learning that we have gained over the past few months, that's certainly something that's viable and doable. There's nothing that prohibits us from doing that. Again, we would not be in any way violating any labor laws. The mechanics of that would be, in the ordinary course, no different than any policy that would come before you for review, based on the recommendations of staff and its companion AP. So that's something that we can certainly do, independent of this motion.
May I follow up? Procedurally, now we fall into a bit of a gray area. If we are to approve this policy, you could still do a merge in the fall with the respectful workplace policy if you so chose. And if we are to reject this policy, you could still do that, the same thing in the fall. So procedurally, you could still do it no matter what we do with this policy. We can vote against this policy, we can vote for this policy, and at the end of the day, when the fall comes, you could merge all of the information that is in both this draft and the existing respectful workplace policy if you so chose.
Procedurally, I'm going to defer to...
Point of information, Trustee or Vice Chair, just the clarification on you. My understanding is that it would be us as trustees that would have to approve changes to that policy. Is that correct?
Yes. So what Amy is putting forward is this evening we do have several options as to how we proceed with this policy. We can, as Amy said, we could flat out reject this policy. Done. In the fall, when I think Amy said the respectful workplace policy comes up for review in its natural course of timelines, language could be added. So that is an option. Another option that Amy laid out was that we could just go ahead and approve this policy as it is. And in the fall, there's nothing stopping that respectful workplace policy from being be made more robust to include other language. But then in the fall, you're going to have two policies with potentially the same information. So,
can I please finish?
Yeah, go ahead, okay. Amy.
Yeah. So what I'm looking at is if we reject this policy, could go back in the fall and embed all of the elements that are in this policy that we wish to go forward with into the respectful workplace policy. If we accept it, he could do the same thing and we would just rescind the professionalism policy. So the end result would be the same. The only difference would be that for these intervening months, which will not be school months because we are almost finished the school year, for these intervening months, we would have in place a professionalism policy versus if we vote against, there would be nothing in place until the respectful workplace policy is reviewed. I'm just trying to fill the gaps, as it were, and there are so many ways to move forward on this that I'm just trying to make sure that everyone around the table understands that either way, Sari and his team could choose to put this language in the respectful workplace policy, which would then come back to the board and we would then vote. Okay?
All right. Xinyi, you're up next.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So I believe professionalism standard is necessary and must be very clear within the board. And HDSB has code of conduct. Code of conduct has set the general guidelines for the whole HDSB community. That has already covered many general rules. However, there were some incidents happened that result in the community from some concerns from the community. That means even with existing policies, standards, and procedures, certain violation still happen. And for example, vaping, because vaping, we can find that there's a rule defined by the Halton region. There's a bylaw passed. If any vaping, smoking in the school area, then there's a fine, right, for first offender or the multiple offenders. So, but I don't see we have any, because these rules, actually, we don't have any reference or not defined in our policy or AP. And then it's a confusion for sometimes we don't know where we can find those rules. And somebody reference some rules and we don't know is this applicable or not. So because all the rules are defined in different places, like Ontario regulation, PPM, or also the regional bylaw like vaping or smoking, or set by the regulating body such as OCT. Since the board doesn't have such a policy and it's not very clear, it's not easy to reference. So I have a question. So first, I agree with Trustee Collett, and doesn't matter we vote yes or vote no to the policy, and the outcome is the same. The difference is the time when we can have it to add that to update the policy. And my question is, with or without the policy, the professionalism policy, will the board administration consider to add the guidelines and the rules defined in OCT ethical standard and the OCT professional misconduct of sexual nature into the HDSB AP, or we can reference those rules to make our rules is clear, and for the whole HDSB community can have one place as a reference to check all rules. That's my question. Thank you.
Who would you like to answer that? All right. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Trustee Zhang, through Vice Chair Rocha, to all trustees. You make good points, Trustee Zhang. You're absolutely correct. We live in a very complicated legal landscape, and there's, from an employment perspective, there's, countless pieces of legislation, regulation that we're bound by. Ideally, yes, you are correct. It would be really nice and useful and helpful for all of us to find one document, one-stop shop, so to speak, that references all of these regulations and legislations and directives and PPMs that govern all of our behavior. That's obviously not possible given the volume of employment-related legislation. Having said that, and I've said this in the past, the absence of an HDSB branded policy per se, or an AP, does not in any way preclude us from referencing those pieces that you referenced. You are correct. The professional misconduct as it relates to teachers speaks to sexual abuse, psychological abuse as professional misconduct. Teachers are members of a regulatory body, and then they are heavily invested in what the regulatory body demands of them. So in addition to what the HDSB offers by way of training and referencing to these documents, the regulatory body also has a statutory obligation to communicate with their members. You will also see on our board website our administrative procedure in relation to child abuse. And the Child Protection Act speaks to the very things that you had mentioned. So you're absolutely correct. There are many different sources of authority that we have to be aware of, and sometimes it does get confusing. That said, this is our job, as staff, as senior staff, to be aware of all these pieces, to reference staff to these pieces, and to cite them when necessary.
Follow-up, quick question. So my last question is,
Shinyi, you're out of time, but you can go back on the speakers list, okay? Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you. So my question is regarding the references at the bottom of the professionalism policy. I think there are 5 under legal and 1 under the Ontario College of Teachers and 2 under the board references. This document is basically built on the references, I believe. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So because they already exist, nothing is new. So I don't see any, personally, I don't see any reason for this policy because what is in place already exists and there's nothing new here, so we don't potentially need a professionalism policy because everything is already in existence. Is that correct?
Through you, Vice Chair Rocha, to Trustee Amos, the short answer is you are correct. We, absent this policy, it does not procedurally, substantively prevents us from referencing the Human Rights Code, Ontario regulations, and so on and so forth. You're correct.
So can I just follow up quickly? So that means that if there was something that had to be dealt with, we already have the tools to deal with it.
That is also correct.
Thank you.
Jean.
Thank you very much to the Vice Chair, I'm hearing Trustee Collard's breakdown of if whether we reject the policy, if we were to reject the policy, that aspects of the policy could in fact be adopted or massaged into the Respectful Workplace that's up for review this fall. And that's something that is entirely possible. My first question is it early in the fall that we are reviewing that policy?
Through you, Vice Chair Rocha, to Trustee Gray. I believe the companion AP is the review date is November. I'm not sure if I believe the Respectful Workplace policy is already due for review. So yeah, that would be the fall then.
Okay, so
Jean maybe can correct me.
With the thought that they are coming up fairly well early. That's mid fall anyway. My concern is when I heard the word that we would take then, and if we were to pass this policy, that we would rescind it later. And I'd prefer not to do that. I'd prefer maybe to not pass this policy and understand or have the understanding that concepts or definitions or whatever are going to be adopted into these other documents so that we are in fact having that. I'm not really in favor of approving something knowing that later I'm going to rescind it. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
Carol.
Thank you. Through you, Vice Chair Tanya, to Superintendent Taha. Just a follow on to what we were just talking about with dates. That was my question. So the Respectful Workplace Policy, the review date on it is February 2022. So does that mean it is not coming up for review, or that never happened? I guess I'm just confirming that in the fall we'll be looking at this policy.
And I'll look to Jean for confirmation. I believe the policy is well due for review based on that date.
Okay, so that's overdue, not
overdue.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I appreciate your very clear answer, and I think you've stated it previously between when we passed this motion in January and now, is that staff have all the tools that they need to ensure professionalism in the board. And as someone who spends a lot of time in the schools, I definitely see it. There is I think the third paragraph of the professionalism policy in the objectives. Sorry, I just want to confirm. There's some language in there that I think is really quite nice, and I haven't seen it before in policies. So perhaps when we do get to that review in the fall, there's some language in there that could be incorporated, but I'd very much be in favor of as you've suggested, to do some minor modifications to that policy in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Margot?
Okay, thank you. Tanya, through you, kind of to Sari, kind of to Curtis. So again, I think with all the work that we've done and all the looking that we've done and all the policies and recognizing that really what the professionalism policy is a consolidation of a whole bunch of other policies that are already in place. So my question is, so I'm wondering, or out loud, which is kind of, I think, where a lot of the other trustees' heads are at as well. Instead of focusing on developing a new policy, what types of actions could we take, and I'm asking Director Ennis and yourself, I know Amy loves to use the word robust, so to think about how we are ensuring that those other policies are able to fill the gaps that maybe we're seeing as to why the original question came about bringing about a professionalism policy.
Thank you, Margot. Through you, Tanya, to Margot. So if I'm going to just break down your question, obviously we've spent a lot of time and resources, and I think it's value add, reflecting on the notion of professionalism, consulting with a wide range of stakeholders, leaving aside the mechanics and the technicality. Do we need this? Do we not need this? The feedback was very valuable, and great contributions and commentary has been received by the board. So in the spirit of honoring that, we can certainly comprehensively look at, for example, Trustee Baxter pointed out that the third paragraph in this policy is a powerful one, profound one that we can embed in our respectful workplace policy, but perhaps rebrand it to speak to professionalism and respect. For instance, our APs list a host of actions or behaviors that amount to incivility, racism, something that's dishonorable or unprofessional, but we don't go through, listing all, the examples, for example, that are cited in Regulation 437. So that could be another piece that we can embed in our APs. So going through policies and APs and looking for opportunities to really reaffirm and underscore some of these expectations. I do want to stress that their absence, I sound like a broken record, the absence of an explicit mention of those kinds of things does not in any way, I don't want the public to think that our hands are tied. It's important that they have the trust and the faith in these procedures and in the board and its staff that we can act on these issues. But nonetheless, it's never a bad thing to reinforce it. So that would be from my, operational perspective. I'll turn it to Director Ennis. Perhaps he wants to add a few things.
No, you said most of what I would have said.
So if I can just follow up, because I think, I agree with the majority of what people are saying is that we really don't need another policy, but I think it's also extremely important, as you kind of said, is that with all the attention that's been focused on this policy from the public, that they don't feel we're abandoning our commitment to ensuring that we are following what they're asking us to do. So I think it's really important that when we are saying, yeah, we don't need a professionalism policy, that doesn't mean we don't need to be professional. I think that what we need to be looking at is how are we as a board ensuring that the policies that we have in place are robust, and use the language that has been seen as being substantive and recognizing the feedback that we've received from the community, as you said. So thank you very much.
All right, Joanna.
Thank you. Through you, Vice Chair. So I agree with everything that's being said. And in the spirit of, moving forward and perhaps not to look like, we're dropping things and then we're going to resume this whole conversation like it's a brand new conversation in the fall. Would it be wise to not accept this policy, but at the same time, pass a motion or whatever that gets the work started on looking at these other policies and incorporating and exactly what you've described, doing that work, starting it now, so that in the fall, drafts come ready for comment and hopefully approval.
Curtis would like to.
Thank you for that, Trustee Oliver. Through the Vice Chair Rocha, I would say that we don't really need a motion to do this. In the normal course of the review and upgrading of the policies and procedures coming forward, we're committing to doing that. And early in the fall, as Trustee Baxter pointed out, this is long overdue. So we would not be waiting as we'd hit the ground running in September to bring that to the Board of Trustees.
All right.
Just to follow up, so then I think we need to be very clear in when we discuss this so that the public doesn't think that we're just abandoning it, right? Like that there is a plan, there's a commitment, and it's just going to happen in a different fashion.
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. To be clear, we are not abandoning anything. We're simply, if that is the will of the trustees, we would certainly strengthen the existing APs or policies, come the fall to embed a lot of the feedback we've heard, a lot of the language that we use, a lot of the things that are incorporated in the policy as it stands right now.
Shinyi.
Thank you, to Vice Chair, to Superintendent Taha. So I believe all the policies are defined at a very high level, and so for the community, actually, they need to know more details. The process, all the process are defined in the procedures, and so it doesn't matter that we have this policy or we don't have a policy. So I believe there are a bunch of a bunch of APs procedures for enhancement. So this is we need to enhancement to respond to the community demands. So in your mind, Superintendent Taha, so which policies or AP, for example, all the APs in your mind needs enhancement? So if you can give us some examples, provide us a brief list. Thank you.
Through you, Vice Chair Rocha, to Trustee Zhang. Thank you for that question. I would be doing you a disservice if I answered on the spot. There's a lot of policies and procedures that we have. I feel they are strong and robust, to borrow from Trustee Collard's vocabulary. Having said that, certainly it's an exercise worth taking to take a look at these policies, and as Director Ennis pointed out, we do that in the ordinary course. There's a schedule that we follow. Now, having the benefit of hindsight and the process that we've gone through, the consultation process with the public and the discussions and the discourse that we've had here, we see an opportunity, for example, for the respectful workplace policy to perhaps borrow from some of the legal documents that this draft policy referenced. So here's an opportunity or a policy that I can name right off the bat. again, not necessarily to strengthen it per se, but to have it be more explicit and more comprehensive in terms of what we expect of staff. And so professionalism as a concept that resides within the regulatory bodies, it becomes embedded in our own everyday practices instead of it standing alone, even though it's applicable. So that would be one benefit of that.
And through you, Vice Chair, if I may just add, Trustee Zhang, just to add one specific AP would be the Respectful Workplace Free of Discrimination and Harassment AP, which I believe has the kind of specificity that you're asking for, and I think the public would be looking for, that we can strengthen.
All right, Amy?
Yes, so through you to Sari. Since the respectful workplace policy is approximately 1.5 years past its review date, I'm wondering if perhaps the review of it could start now. And I don't mean like immediately, but I mean not wait until September, but happen during the summer months and perhaps be ready for us in September or October instead of waiting. I think you've got a good idea of what it is we would like. And if it's past its best before date, then it probably needs to be freshened up in a multitude of other ways as well. But yes, I agree with that. All of these references, documents that are referenced, would be wonderful to have them referenced in that as well. So I'm glad that you're thinking that way. And just wondering, I know you have collective bargaining, so I'm not trying to double down on you over the summer months, but I am wondering if there's a possibility that could start a little bit sooner than the fall.
Through you, Vice Chair Rocha, Trustee Collard, no, that's absolutely reasonable and doable. Should trustees go in that direction, we can, and the majority of the heavy lifting has been done, I would say. So yeah, that's, the timelines you're proposing as early fall, is fine.
Thank you.
All right, there are no other speakers, so I will just sum up some things and let the board know what our next steps are. And just to not put Sari on the spot, although the policy, it does say it was supposed to be for review in February of 2022, I want everybody to remember that earlier this year, we changed our review dates for every 4 years. So technically, the policy was due for review this February. So, and the board's been a little busy with budget and boundaries and new schools. So no worries. Okay, so I don't want people to think that the other policy was a year overdue. It isn't. It's just a couple of months. So no worries there. Okay, so to sum up, obviously this is committee of the whole. We don't vote on anything today. What I've heard people say is that I think they're okay with bringing this version of the policy to board next week. Because it is making its second appearance at board, it means you will need to vote. So to lay out some of the options, you can vote when the policy is presented, you either vote yes to accept it or no to reject it. What I'm hearing some of you say, and I am of the same mind, is that the board has many policies, many procedures, many acts, many supporting documents that support professionalism. And we have the means to act on any instances where professionalism is questioned. So, having said that, I am of the opinion that we really don't need to approve it, only then to rescind it, and that's just unnecessary work. So at the end of the day, next week, you will have the option to vote and approve it. You will have the option to vote no and reject it. You also have the option to make some friendly amendments to this version. And with that, I'm going to look to one more speaker, and then we are ending this conversation for this week, as it will be on next week's agenda. Go ahead, Margot.
Thanks, Tanya. So again, I think what is really important, which I think a lot of trustees have also intimated to, is ensuring confidence in the public. So we are not pulling a motion or pulling a policy to get it off the table. We are doing so because we are looking at strengthening our other policies. So I think, again, that is the message that we need to make sure that we are looking at, is how we aren't looking at this as just dismissive. We are looking at it in a way that we are focusing on the strengthening of the board policies that are already in place to ensure the public that we are answering the feedback that we received, the research that we have done, and the digging we have done into our policies. So I just wanted to remind everybody, so I know that if there are some questions or concerns, is to look to that idea of how we are strengthening the policies that are already in existence. Thank you.
All right, so it's 8 o'clock and we still have a few items on the agenda. So I will call a 5-minute break, and we will resume at 8:05. That clock is actually correct.
Yeah.
So we will resume at 8:05 and get the rest of the agenda taken care of. Thank you. All right. We are back. And I do need to take attendance again.
So anyways, I wanted to bring the discussion here because I know sometimes Wednesdays causes a conflict for people because of meetings or going away to meetings or conferences, and see if anybody would like to consider having a board meeting on another day, maybe like a Tuesday or something like that. And I don't know if the director wants to add anything, because I know he was going to ask these superintendents and stuff what they thought.
Thanks for that, Trustee Amos. Certainly, one of the things that I noticed is that many of the conferences, professional learning that may be happening away, starts on Wednesdays. And I found myself in, even many staff have been away. They have to break away from their colleagues and their learning to attend board meetings. And I, personally missed a number of other opportunities because I didn't want to miss board meetings. So it would be helpful to me if they were, for example, on a Tuesday. Thursdays don't work because usually it's a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, mostly that it exists. But open to the will of the group, and it would be helpful. I find that we could have our professional learning and also not miss any board meetings.
So I wanted to bring it here for discussion to see if there's a willingness to potentially change the date of the board meeting.
All right, so I will look to our speakers list, and we do have a list. So go ahead, Amy.
Thank you. I would be in favor of moving it to a Tuesday because I think that gives staff more time to start the work that gets approved the night before. My only concern is that we have Student Senate and SEAC meeting on Tuesday evenings, and there may be other things as well. Of course, they could be rescheduled to Wednesdays or Mondays or whatever night worked for everyone on those committees. My other concern, though, is that by saying, of course, they could reschedule, well, maybe that would preclude some of them from participating if they had to change their nights. And for some trustees and staff, perhaps they have something else happening on Tuesday nights that they'd have to give up. So I think we'd have to have unanimity on proceeding with a date change. Because if even one person wasn't able to attend, that wouldn't be fair. That's really my only major concern, but we also would have to consult with Student Senate and SEAC to make sure that switching for them wouldn't create a problem also.
All right, Margot?
Hi, thanks. Through you, Tanya, to both Kelly and Amy. So one thing I just want to clarify for everyone here, this would not take place until 2025 because all the board meetings are already set for next year. So this would be something that's done a year out. 2024, sorry, September, we're only September 2023. So yeah, so September of 2024 is when this will take place. I really don't mind. I just think that we need to be really careful that we remain consistent, that it's not a changing date. It's all, if we're changing it just to Tuesday, it's just Tuesday. But I think, again, we need to check. For all of us who are here at the table, I know that some of us ran on the premise that it was a Wednesday evening that was a commitment. So I think we need to be conscious of previous engagements or commitments that other people have as well. So that was it. Thank you.
Shinyi, go ahead.
Thank you. So for myself, it doesn't matter for me if this is Tuesday or Wednesday, but just one thing I needed the director and the senior team to think about this, because there's a Monday, could be a long weekend, and so people are not working on Monday. That's not business day. So how many days will affect our meeting? So because if the Tuesday we have a meeting, maybe our senior team or other senior staff has not had enough time to prepare the report or some internal discussions, something like that. Okay, thank you.
All right, Jean?
Thank you very much. As everyone knows, the driving engine behind our meetings is our general manager, Jean. So I would like to just hear how you would see a Tuesday impact the work that you do in collecting all of the reports and having everything ready to be accessible by the public in a timely fashion.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. The change would simply move the deadline up by a day. The consideration I would ask trustees to have in mind is the cycle would also change for committee, for example. So reports that are kind of generated at committee of the whole, which are then intended to be forwarded to the next board meeting. So tonight is a committee of the whole. If trustees had a draft report in mind, for example, that they'd hoped to have ready for the immediate next board meeting, which is next Wednesday, should the meeting occur on Tuesday instead, that would mean your report would have been due today. So the committee cycle would either shift with the board meeting schedule as well, or it would mean that committee reports, take 2 weeks or 3 weeks before they appear at a board meeting.
Donna?
Thank you very much. I'm not opposed to this. I think it's worth looking into, especially given the rationale proposed by Kelly and Curtis. But I would suggest if we go forward with it, that we shift the committee meetings as well, our committee of the whole, to Tuesday nights as well. I don't think it would. The consistency, I think, in knowing that, right now, every Wednesday, pretty much, I'm at the board. To know going forward, every Tuesday we'd be at the board. I would like to see consistency there.
Robbie?
Through you, Vice Chair, to the General Manager. To be clear, that would mean we would get the package a day earlier as well? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, what Kelly's request is if we shift one day early, everything shifts one day early. So everything would fall in line with the new date. Kelly, I'm not opposed to moving to Tuesdays, but I do recognize we have approved the board meeting schedule for the 23-24 calendar year. So anything we do would take effect for September of 2024. Would you be open to perhaps just maybe for the fall providing a report on possible impacts? We talked today about SEAC would have to find a new date. We talked about Student Senate. I think there are also other committees out there that also meet on Tuesdays. So not that we're making a decision today, but would you be open to providing some sort of report in the fall at Committee of the Whole saying, if we were to move, these would be the impacts. And so that way, if we think that that's the way we want to go, then we could work throughout the year to connect with those other committees to see if they would also be open to finding a new date.
And that's very similar to what's happened in the past, because I know SEAC, I believe, used to meet on Wednesdays or Thursdays and then changed when we did. And Student Senate, I can't remember when they used to meet. I actually don't believe Student Senate was a thing when we used to have it on the other dates. So I will definitely pull it together and see if there's anything else that's impacted. But thank you for your consideration. I just think that it might make life easier for people and give people the flexibility to be involved in some of those other things that are available. And I know some things happen at schools on Wednesday nights more often than Tuesdays too.
All right, so looking forward to, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify to Trustee Bryden's earlier question about receiving the agenda package. The board bylaw requires notice provision for board meetings being 96 hours. The reason trustees receive it on Friday is because 96 hours before Wednesday would be Saturday at 6 p.m. So moving it to Tuesday, 96 hours would be by Friday at 6 p.m. So you're still receiving the package roughly about the same time on a Friday.
But that could be changed if we wanted to change our bylaws.
That would be an impact you'd have to include in your report. Changes to the bylaws. All right, so seeing no further comments on that report, up next is 3.4 Committee of the Whole agenda items, and I'll be presenting. The reason I put it here as a discussion item is that we've got 4 new trustees on the committee, and as we plan the Committee of the Whole meetings for the remainder of the year and for next year, if there are any items that you would like to see covered or topics that you'd like to see covered, the Committee of the Whole is always a good place to raise those issues. Or if there's something that you would like to work on together, we could do it here. So perhaps in the fall, what I can do is organize a little bit of an ad hoc session where we could just go in and write what you'd hope to accomplish at Committee of the Whole. Would you like to see more PD at Committee of the Whole? Would you like us to work on whatever it is? You could either send me those topics ahead of time, or we could do a little session in the fall to collect your ideas, because the Committee of the Whole really is for us to sit and talk and discuss what it is we have on our minds. Any questions on that? Joanna, go ahead.
Yeah, Tanya, so there used to be a spreadsheet, right, with the topics and roughly when. So is that still available to us? Okay.
I believe I sent it just last week again.
Okay.
So the spreadsheet is there. You do have commenting access. So if you'd like to add something, or if you know you're the chair of a committee and you need to present something by a certain date, it's always good to go in there and add your item as well as how much time you anticipate taking. You can add it directly onto the spreadsheet. All right, seeing no further questions. Right. Seeing no further questions on that topic, we're going to move on to standing committees. Because this is the last committee of the whole meeting for this school year. 4.1.1 board self-assessment. Kelly, as the chair of the committee, do you want to provide us with an update as to where the committee is at?
Through you, I have a document that I'll be sharing, which basically gives our update. But as you know, we recently had a meeting where we discussed the trustee rules of the road, and we all did breakout sessions and discussed the elements of those rules of the road. So I've pulled some of those suggestions together, and they will be coming back to a committee of the whole at the next available meeting that we can get scheduled on, and probably in September, for the final discussion. We are going to be developing mechanisms for all trustees to be able to access our current governance practices, processes, and professionalism, and we're going to be looking at using surveys, interviews, and guided observation among best practices, so we can do a self-assessment. We're developing a process to use these self-assessment tools to make sure that we're annually looking at what's going on at the board and whether we want to involve other people outside the Board of Trustees. And we're going to have periodic self-assessments which will be analyzed and used to develop recommendations for continuous improvement and goal setting for the upcoming year. And we'll be able to provide a report upon this completion to the Board of Trustees. So that's what's coming up and what's happened. And I will forward the report to everyone.
All right. And if anyone has a question, if you can put yourself on the speakers list. All right. Seeing no questions. Thank you, Kelly. We are moving up to the governance document review. Amy, you are the chair of that committee, and I believe you have some proposed changes to the bylaw to go over with us this evening.
Yes, as you'll remember last week in your board package, there was a motion to make a few small changes to our bylaw. And after that meeting, we had a governance document review standing committee meeting and further reviewed those changes and made some changes to the changes. So I sent out a revised document prior to tonight's meeting so that everyone would have the ability to see that document. It's probably the only thing you'll have received from me this afternoon. So I think it says for tonight in the subject line. I think that's what it says. And what it is just a spreadsheet of the proposed changes. So after we met last week, we decided to make some wording changes to how we had things, and we changed the order of things. Basically, what the first row deals with is breaking 4.1.2 and 4.1.3 into 5 points and making them more robust so that they're a little bit easier to read and that there's a better flow to them. There's really no major change to this except that we have said in here that we will be voting on the Board of Trustees meeting calendar after the approval of the school year calendar. That is the only change. The rest of it is just making it flow better and fleshing out some of the information so that it is more logical, more sensible. If there are any questions on that section, can you please let me know? Jean Gray.
Yes, thank you. It struck me as odd to read, shall be the head office of the HDSB. Why wouldn't we be referring to the JWS Singleton Center?
That change was made back in the day when we were considering purchasing a new property and building a new head office that might or might not be called the JW Singleton Center. And so it became a logical thing for us to continue referring to the head office, because by doing so, if we do relocate, we don't have to change the bylaw. I'm not seeing any other questions on that one, so I'll move down to the next one. There were two items, 4.4.3 and 4.4.4, which basically said the same thing, but one was, should there be no quorum present within 30 minutes? And the other one was, when the number of trustees at a meeting falls below quorum during the course of the meeting. So that's been replaced with just 4.4.3, where it combines both of those situations in one point, so that we're not being repetitive. And so combining it gives the same outcome. Are there any questions about that one? Robbie.
The way I'm reading the revised wording is actually substantively different. In that in the existing 4.4.4, if somebody walks out of the room, we fall below quorum, we have 30 minutes to reestablish quorum. And in the revised wording, I read, at any time during the meeting, that suggests that quorum would cease immediately and the board meeting be disbanded.
Good catch. We'll have to look at that again. Yeah, we will definitely look at that again. Thank you. Okay, any other questions about that one? 4.5.5 talks about the timelines and how a trustee makes a motion. And we learned earlier this year that we were using the notices of motion portion of the agenda incorrectly, and that notices of motion are actually supposed to be used when someone submits the paperwork for a motion after the deadline for setting the agenda. So those are the items that go under notices of motion. What we had been doing in practice was announcing, I'm going to bring a motion in at the next board meeting regarding X, Y, or Z. And so people were verbalizing their intent to bring a motion, which is not the same as notices of motion. So we've structured this section so that it's more clear about notices of motion and what they are, and that a trustee can, during trustee comments and questions, verbalize, I intend to bring a motion on this topic at the next meeting or sometime in the future, just so that trustees have it on their radar. Tanya?
Yeah, so I have a comment just to simplify the wording, Tidge. The highlighted section, or at least it's highlighted on my printer, or bolded. So in the replace with, in number 1 bracket, there's the sentence that reads, motion submitted in writing after noon the business day before the agenda is published will be placed under notices of motion. I have a suggestion just to simplify the wording. Can we say motion submitted in writing after the deadline will be placed under notices of motion?
Yeah, I believe we had this conversation when we were having our committee meeting, and it was determined that the deadline wasn't fixed.
But it is. If you read the sentence just before it, it says by no later than noon, one business day before.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I will actually put deadline in brackets.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And then further down, you have item 2.1, but really that should be item 3 bracket, not 2.1.
Okay, but they both deal with prior notice.
Yeah. But if you look on the left column, 4.5.53 bracket, it's the same sentence, but
Yep.
it's item 3. So just for continuity, it could be number 3 as well in the replace with.
Okay, is 2.1 stand alone or does 2.1 rely on 2?
So I think, if you look at this time.
So that last sentence, it's a standalone. So it talks about where prior notice is not possible. So just like today, we have it as a separate item.
Yeah.
It would still continue to be a separate item because the language hasn't changed.
But it maybe should have been 2.1 before, because it's the topic, it's the subject matter that defines whether or not it's a separate item. It relies on 2 because 2 is where the topic of prior notice is raised. I would say that the way we currently have it is not as clear as the way that we have it suggested. Jean?
If I can just add maybe clarification as to why they might be separate. So notwithstanding the above in terms of submitting motions, any trustee may make a motion related to an action item on the agenda without prior notice. Those motions might be amending motions. So they're subsidiary to the main motion, and trustees may move those without prior notice. So if a motion is made and a trustee wishes to, submit an amending motion, I think the existing subsection 2 of 4.5.5A provides that flexibility, whereas 4.5.5A3 speaks to a main motion that a trustee may wish to make without prior notice. So I guess for procedurally, if you want to look at it, you can look at 2 as referring to the ability to make subsidiary motions, and 3 as the ability to submit a main motion without prior notice.
Yep, I got it. Thank you. Okay, was there any other questions about that? Margot, you had your hand up?
So it's just for me, looking at notwithstanding, you've got 1. Yeah, there you are there, Amy, that wrote, no. So number 2, it says notwithstanding 1 bracket above. Could you not just say notwithstanding the above? Like when I look at that, I just think of that as a beginning of a list. It's technical, and this isn't the place to be looking at.
That was the lawyer.
I know, so just saying. So again, this is not the place to be going through and nitpicking through things, but
Yeah.
it's just something.
I agree with you, but the lawyer liked that phrasing. But I agree with you. Is there anything else under that item?
Yep. So your last bullet was to add 4.5.5A3 bracket. So if we take what Jean said into consideration, this one should actually be number 4.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, now that we have our numbers straight. The last item, Appendix A, we currently have 5.8 public questions on our public agenda. And it has caused some issues with people asking questions that can't be answered in public, or people asking questions that use defamatory or nasty language, and people asking questions that are not relevant to anything on the agenda. And because of that, it makes it look like we don't want to answer questions when we say during the meeting, well, there are questions, but we can't answer them. It makes us look like we're not being transparent. The letter of the law says that we don't have to have that on the agenda as long as the public has a way of participating in our meetings. And they do. They can sit in the gallery, they can watch the live stream, they can text, they can delegate, they can write emails, they can make phone calls. There are a myriad of ways, and we know that we're going to be updating our delegation policy this fall. Hopefully, I'm starting it this summer, if I can coax some people to work through the summer with me. But we have ways of making sure the public is heard in a public manner, and we need to make sure that the public is aware of those ways. It's very disconcerting when we get questions and then look like we're not wanting to answer them, when in fact we just can't answer them because of either the way they're written, the subject matter, or the fact that the question belongs in private session. Jean.
Thank you. I just wanted to be reminded, we brought that whole business in at the beginning or during COVID, and we're redirected to do that by the minister. And is the minister now said we don't have to do it?
We weren't directed to have questions from the public on our agenda. What we were directed to do was have two-way communication at our board meetings. We needed to allow the public to participate in our board meetings. And when we sent that for legal review, the opinion of the lawyer was that we should add it to the agenda, even though we were already doing sufficient. She thought we should add it to the agenda. And probably for the case of COVID, that was an exception that we made, even though it was over and above, we made that exception. But now it doesn't have the same, we don't need it in the same way because we are open to the public completely. It's not an online presence, it's a physical presence and an online presence.
So my second question would be, how do we go about changing that practice? Is it a natural sort of thing that could just drift away at the end of this June and so that we start September fresh without that session?
Margot, you're back on the list.
Yeah, so no, I was just quickly going to also remind Jean, I'm pretty sure you would have been at OPSPA when we were reviewing all the different ways the different boards did this, and our board was seen as going way too, like, above and beyond. So again, yeah, so just to remind you that.
And that is the end of the suggested changes to the bylaw. And yes, Tanya.
So if we are doing that to the public agenda, we also need to make that change to the committee of the whole agenda.
Yes, and to the audit committee agenda and to the SEAC agenda and to all of them.
Okay,
Yeah.
So will that be part of the recommendation in the report?
Well, no, this is the bylaw.
Okay, so could you add in a little squiggly line so that when it appears on the report next week, we could also cover off the committee of the whole agenda?
I can do a squiggly line, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Okay, we'll fix it in the committees and appointments policy and procedure as well.
Perfect.
A squiggly line.
Okay, it's a little add-on line.
I like your squiggly line almost as much as Margot likes robust.
So that brings us to the end of the governance, the proposed changes to the board governance bylaw. We are up to 4.2.1, the other committees, and this evening, Jean will be presenting a report from the Inspire Awards Ad Hoc Committee. Go ahead, Jean.
Okay, thank you very much. You have the report before you, and I just want to highlight a few things. First of all, I'm very happy that so many of the committee members are in the room tonight that can add and, provide clarification. And just want to review that in active participation on this committee was Amy and Joanna and Tanya and our student trustees, Ethan and Cindy, but also members at large and very instrumental in our movement forward with this was Susan Thrasher from the Director's Office and Associate Director Christina Samini. So with all of the meetings that we had, I provided for you a table of notes, and I provided then on the bottom of the very first page of this report a summary of what we are recommending, I guess. And some of these things will require changes to different various documents, but some of them are very, sort of philosophical, I guess, in base. But I want to remind everybody of why we started to have our committee formed, and that the purpose was to review and ensure that the Inspire Award program ensured that all aspects of the program was realized, and the objective of the program while operating in a manageable way. And for those that don't remember, we have becoming, this program has become increasingly popular. We've had lots of uptake, and we're so very pleased about that because we're recognizing more people. However, it has resulted in the way in which we present and also the way in which we might evaluate. It has provided us with I guess a cause to pause and reflect and see if we can improve and update, because this is an award system that was created by trustees a number of years ago, and it has undergone different renovations through the years. So the first thing, and probably the most important thing, I think, of all the recommendations coming from this committee, was that the 4 categories on which we were currently evaluating nominees in a scale of 1 to 3, that we would drop those 4 categories and simply look at the overall nomination and answer the question yes or no in support of whether the person or group receiving the award would have gone above and beyond, and had they inspired others by having a lasting impact. And so that was sort of, if you would, our new branding of the Inspire Award. And it certainly simplifies evaluation. It gives a holistic overview. And so this was the recommendation going forward on the committee. And please stop me if you want any clarification. I'll just go through the other 3 key points in my summary. To facilitate this, we believe that the nominators would need very fulsome information, exemplars, perhaps a video. I've done some initial work in talking to the communications department member of tonight to get the ball rolling through the summer. But and the student trustees were really, really excited about this too, being able to provide a video for the students and a video for the members of the community and teachers and staff that would really talk to what's a successful nomination look like. And again, talking to the exemplars, and because we want to really keep the high branding of this award and the importance of this award at its current status. There would be, of course, a follow-up with necessary changes. This is number 3, to the nomination information, the website, the promotional materials, and motions would need to be brought forward to make changes to the applicable governance documents. And I think I've noted them in the chart below. I've gone to our policy to see what we would have to change. Finally, number 4, we have, if you look at this chart, you can see how this committee was pretty fulsome. We were kind of all over the place looking at different aspects, and we had some great discussions, but we really looked at, the process of who can nominate, because we talked about, should student trustees be able to nominate? Should trustees be able to nominate? And we kind of reviewed some of the anchoring elements of this award system over the years, and we had some great conversations about that. But we talked about how presentations would take place at the board. We solidified some of those concepts with respect to the roles of the Inspire Award vice chairs, the HDSP chair and vice chair, and the director's office. The next sentence is very much so important. To conclude, there's much more work to be done. All of these changes and recommendations have backlash, right? They've got follow-up that has to be done. And I'm certainly prepared to take that on this summer with the help of Susan, the help of the communications program people, maybe reaching out to our new trustees, our student trustees to be involved, right? To see if they could be involved in maybe the video or helping to write an exemplar of what a student nomination would look like if it was to be successful. So I'm going to end it there because I imagine there could be some questions, and I'm going to look for help from all of the committee members that are here tonight. But maybe because there's so many of us here, maybe there's fewer questions because you were all there in the making of this this committee report. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jean. We do have a speakers list. Go ahead, Margot.
I said you could have let Kelly go first. Mine's just a quick one. So Jean, if you remember at the other week, we had not an issue, but we didn't know what happens if the trustee who is presenting is not at the board meeting. So I just was wondering, I didn't see it in here. I didn't know if we had decided what the protocol was. If the trustee presenting isn't available, who presents?
Thank you. That was a problem, and I know I discussed it with Margot, and I had already approached Joanna Oliver, but we wanted to know that procedurally, and we discovered there is no procedure. So how would we like it to be? Would it fall to the chair or the vice chair to stand in place of the absentee trustee to be able to make the presentation in person, or would it fall to any other trustee that might be approached by the absentee trustee? I'm easy on either way of that. I kind of like looking to the rest of the floor and taking some of the responsibility and the load away from the top.
All right. So before people provide feedback on that, I'm going to go to the next speaker. So go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you. And I can provide feedback. I think it should go out to whoever you want to ask next. So my question is about the criteria. Is that the part in blue? Is that what the current criteria now is? Because when I was looking, it says see below, but then I couldn't actually find what see below was for when you were looking at the criteria to judge whether they were an inspirational person.
Yeah, pretty much it sums it up in the blue lettering in the chart, but I also had it above in the summary part, and it's the whole notion of the nominee going above and beyond and inspiring others by having a lasting impact. And there's that example of picking up litter is going above and beyond, but if you don't inspire others to join you in that very positive action, then it wouldn't be really a fulsome nomination. So it's the two parts that we're looking for. I think it's going above and beyond and having that lasting impact on others.
And proof of it. I believe that's important too, because
Correct.
Many times we've had to ask for examples of to back up nominations.
And that's exactly why we would want to provide those exemplars of what a good nomination would look like. And it wouldn't be just that, like you wouldn't write, and I believe that they had a lasting impact because I picked up litter the next day. Like, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, a much more impactful result, I think.
So I like the idea of shortening it, but I do think you need to say that they went above and beyond, they've inspired others, and they've had a lasting impact. So that's actually 3 criteria written in one sentence. No, I'm just saying there is. So, but, and we need to see examples, right? So if we're looking to put it as on the website for people to see, we need to say that statement, but we also need to say that examples need to be shown.
For example, in this case, a simple example, the lasting impact has been seen in the school and that an environmental club has been established and that it meets weekly. And it's all the result of this grassroots initiative by this student who has then carried on and led the way, something like that. No, I agree with you. And thank you for, breaking it down. 1, above and beyond. 2, inspired others. 3, lasting impact. Thank you.
No other speakers, but I'll share my thoughts on your first question, and that is if the trustee is absent, I think I would be okay if the chair of the Inspire committees read out the award and have the chair present it. Those are my 2 cents.
I guess I would look around the room to see if anybody feels strongly one way or the other. I think it's, it's partly a matter of convenience. I know when I discussed this with Joanna, I actually had her go and meet the ladies to let them know that I wasn't there and she was going to be presenting that to them. And so there's a kind of a big ask in the break part that Joanna fulfilled in order to be able to present that. But if there's no strong opinion, I think anybody can make it happen in any which way. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no other speakers, if you do have some feedback you'd like to share with Jean, feel free to send it her way. All right, we are nearing the end. We are now up to item number 5, which is trustee questions and comments. I will look to the speakers list.
Sorry, Jean.
Jean Gray, go ahead.
Go ahead.
She was very quick with the reset button.
I'm resetting.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I wanted to share a nugget from the OPSPA conference, and I've discussed it, I think, already with Margot, and that was, and it's a question that we could maybe address here, and that is when it comes to PD, we learned that other boards tape their PD so that should a trustee not be able to be at the PD, they might be able to watch the video recording of that PD session later. I'm not sure that all of our professional presenters would be happy to be taped. I'm not sure. We'd have to ask. But is that something that we could consider so that we have the ability to ensure that all of our trustees are able to participate? But right now, we've got a hit and miss situation underway. Thank you.
Sorry, Jean, are you looking for a response tonight, or are you looking perhaps for the PD committee to look into that as a takeaway?
I like that idea of the PD committee looking into that.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. We'll go on to the next speaker, Kelly. No,
that was just timing for Jean because I reset her.
Oh, okay. So last week at the board meeting, we passed the ad hoc committee for fixed finances. And I didn't know if I was supposed to put out a call to see who was interested or if the chair should doing that.
Margot, would you like to respond?
So we talked about that, and I assumed it was the person who was making the motion that would put the call out for the people on the committee.
Okay, well, I didn't want to do it.
We spoke about that.
I didn't want to do it without asking, so.
Go ahead.
I will put out in a call then to see who's interested.
Okay. Joanna Oliver.
Okay. Thank you. Through you, Vice Chair. One of the other practices that we adopted during the pandemic was to live stream our committee of the whole meetings and have the video posted on the website. And I'm not sure that there was actually a requirement to post the video or to maintain the video for any length of time. And I'm wondering if we're going to continue that practice, or are we just going to live stream the committee of the whole and so be it, and that's it.
So I don't know the answer to that, but Jean, do you have the answer to that, or do you want us to take that away and we'll provide an update? Okay, we will take it away. I will add that to my to-do list, and we'll get back to you. All right, Jean.
Thank you very much. Tonight I was able to present everyone with the Beyond Knowledge Preparing Students for an Uncertain Future, which was a discussion paper brought out by the Ontario Education Partner discussion table, and OPSPA was, of course, very much involved in that. And so I think that's really good reading, but also good reading if you go on the OPSPA site. I happen to have a paper copy, is the 22-23 annual report. And I think that many of you might want to read this report because it'll bring you a greater knowledge about what the achievements are and all of the great things that have happened during this past year as a result of the work of the people in the OPSPA executive and beyond, the trustees that submit to that. My second quick little housekeeping is Inspire Awards. Please, folks, if you have an Inspire Award that has to go out, and I have one here from last week because I wasn't here, please get them out ASAP. And I want to give warning to Joanna, Tanya, Kelly, Xingyi, Carol, Margot, and Naveed. You will all have an Inspire Award being presented, not being presented in person on the 21st. And so you've got just only about 8 days to scuttle out into the schools and get that award out. Xingyi has 5 such awards. Tanya has 3, Joanna has 2, and the rest of you all have 1. So that's really, really an important thing to do before the end of June. People are looking forward to it. I've heard tonight of 2 schools that are concerned that they haven't seen their awards presented yet at the school. And so we really need to, nudge and move these awards out. Finally, my last point is it's a question to the chair and vice chair.
You know what, Jean? You did catch me because we were trying to figure out an Inspire Award plan delivery system. So.
Okay.
What was your question?
The third, my last thing is we have, and I'm so delighted to have met Robbie tonight for the first time. I wonder, is there going to be a review of the striking committee responsibilities? How do we manage this with an absent our last trustee having left, or is there going to be a shuffle, or does Robbie just fill the spots that were left empty? Just wanted to clarify that.
So Robbie and I met for lunch before, I think the day before he was sworn in, and I gave him an overview of some of the committees that were left vacant by the outgoing trustee, by Matthew, and also asked where he would be interested. So I think this will be a discussion. We have 2 weeks left for June. So I think really it's a discussion to look at ensuring that by September, I know he has interest in student trustee in the student senate, so which is where I am right now, but that would be helpful just because it's sometimes difficult for me to get to that. But he's also interested in SEAC. So again, I know that Joanna is on both of those committees, and there is that difficulty because they often fall on the same night. But we can look at working it out and trying to make sure that Robbie is on committees that he finds interesting. And yes.
And worst case scenario, we will have a striking committee meeting in November. So really, it won't be too much of a window that if he can't find a spot now, by the time we have our next striking committee meeting in November, everyone will everyone will be shuffled around. So
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Joanna?
Yeah, sorry. This relates to the Inspire Awards. So typically we wait to present them off, not in the board meeting, but off-site after they were announced here. Given that this month we have an exceptional situation, we added a second round of awards, could we make an exception and present them before? Okay, thank you, because I think that'll help some of us.
Yeah, so I personally fall into that category. I do have a recipient whose name will be announced publicly on Wednesday, but I will be presenting them their award on Monday because their wish was to be presented at the school, and the principal has already made a time slot available. So if you work with Susan, she could expedite the certificate if needed. Yeah.
Plan them all today.
So good question. All right, seeing no further speakers, we are now up to item number 6, public questions. Margot, are there any questions from the public?
So there is one question from the public, but the member of staff that can answer is no longer here, and so I will forward that to him at a later date.
All right, thank you. So that brings us down to the adjournment of the meeting. So the next committee of the whole will be on September 13th. So mark your calendars. It will be on a Wednesday. So if there are any items you'd like to add, you could go onto the spreadsheet yourself. I did send you a link last week, or you could also send me an email. And just like on Sesame Street, it was always brought to you by the letter A and Z. Well, today's meeting was brought to you by the word robust. So thank you, everyone, for attending and participating this evening. Our agenda has been exhausted, and I call this meeting adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.